Hey, welcome everybody to the very, very humbly titled Most Important Thing, the Most Important Thing podcast. I am your co-host, Dylan Dudney of NFT3, and this is your co-host.
My name is Shashwat
Take it away,
Eternal. I'm
Shashwat. That was
also
your cue.
from, yeah, I'm not having a special like you, man, but yeah, I'm Shashwat Eternal, also from NFT3. I think we're gonna quickly dive in because I know today's topic has Dylan riled up a little bit and super excited. And
I'm
so
all
let's dive right
riled
into it.
up.
What is up with Friend.tech, the meteoric rise
I'm
in
all
some are saying fall of this new crazy DSO thing and larger thoughts on decentralized social as well, of course, But give us a primer, man.
yeah, I'm all riled up, man. I'm all riled up. No, all riled up by this decentralized social. No, I am actually. It's funny. I am kind of riled up. So, and more inspired actually. So I'm glad to see that the narrative of decentralized social is sort of like finding a bit of footing. So we had, I guess this was, I can't believe this, but it was, I would say, what, a year and a half, 2 years ago that BitClout was in what came into the, so it
Right,
was at the
right.
end of the bull, right? Like so, BitClout was quite the phenomenon at the time. They ran into some trouble because they were sort of pre-claiming uh, influencers' names and or their profiles already, and it kind of fizzled out. So this seems to be almost like a rehash in some ways of cloud, in the sense that you are investing. The idea is to invest in a influencer or a celebrity or whatever it may be, and you sort of like have a piece of that. And if their profile goes up, then then you go. It's almost like you're taking a share as a talent agent or manager almost in a way of some upcoming influencer, right? And so there's a particular type of tokenomic or incentivization structure involved in these types of things, and in Friend.tech, it does have a kind of some similarities with BitCloud, but it's got some
Hmm.
nuances and differences. I've done a little bit of a dive into the incentivization structure and done some reading, and for me at least, my analysis, which I think you share, Shashwat, is that it looks like the tempo of, even though it's selling itself as something, it's like, wouldn't it be great if you were able to like see, Taylor Swift in a back alley bar and like you invested in her, and then 10 years later she's where she's at now, and they're kind of giving that idea out for the narrative of Friend.tech. But like the actual way the
Yeah,
incentivization structure works for this
it's very
is
short term. Yeah,
more attuned more towards short term, right? Because trading is sort of at the heart of how you make fees with this stuff. So you're trading, right? Like that's how they're making presumably money, these influencers. So I'd love to hear you opine on a bit on it, but that's my main takeaway is that the structure of Friend
right,
Tech
right.
is not incented toward what its actual sort of like narrative is. And
Yeah,
maybe we could get to a better picture of that, but I'd love to hear you and your thoughts on it too.
yeah, for sure. It's funny. I've actually been working on an article on this whole fintech thing, and so I knew it was top of mind for both of us. That's why I brought it up. But right now, something you said actually made me think of that whole Taylor Swift example. The funny thing is, I remember doing a workshop. I think it was last year, perhaps, which was geared towards like non-Web3 people and trying to basically show them some use cases potentially, right? And this had been one of the potential use cases I had slotted in NFTs actually of artists like musicians trying to create communities around their NFTs and doing stuff like that. Because I think that kind of gatedness can create this potentially. Of course, going back to incentive structures, the issue there is so my by the way, I'm going to put that article out soon, hopefully. But the whole idea to me, step one of Friend.tech is what they figured out was everybody's trying to build a social graph. Everybody's really hyped about decentralized social. Meanwhile, the utility is on a very messaging level of, like it's really not up there. What these guys figured out was that speculation is the secret sauce of Web3 still, or let's say crypto actually,
Mm-hmm.
and especially at this stage of the market, it's essentially, I always say it's either the real builders who are around or just hardcore regions who are around, and since you can't sell to
Mm-hmm.
builders, you're selling to the regions. So it made sense. To me, it's like genius go to market strategy of like just bake in speculation, make it
Mm-hmm.
short term oriented, because that's how you get rapid adoption. I would never knock that. That's like, if anybody knocks that, they have a fundamental misunderstanding around the advantages that this method of incentivization has, Web3 and tokenization. You
Mm-hmm.
have to
Mm-hmm.
respect the kind of rapid
Mm-hmm.
adoption it can create out of basically not nothing, but not much. That being said, of course, how do
Mm-hmm.
you make that thing then last? And how do you, so to me, it's like, it's not that there shouldn't be a short term incentive structure. It's just that there needs to also be a long term one. And balancing that is obviously the hard part. And perhaps this is good go to market, but it's not really good retention, and it's not really, uh, and that's where product design would come in. And even if it was tokenomics design, like you said, if it's all trading fees oriented, right? That's where also perhaps tokenomics design can be aimed at making it possibly more long term oriented. But my first instinct about it essentially was, boy, what they just knocked it out of the park with the go to market, man. And I mean, base chain in general.
Mm-hmm.
Projects on that thing for some reason seem to really be go to market experts, and it's been really interesting to see.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely inspired me to feel more optimistic about the chances of decentralized social becoming a thing, right? So even as we've seen as of yesterday, and I haven't looked at it, in fact, as of this morning, I'm on Eastern time. I know you're on India time, but you may have some more information on this than I do. But I actually don't know where it looks like today, but as of yesterday, it was like 95% down in terms of activity and in terms of value across the board for all of these profiles or whatever that you could get keys for. Anyway, although it looks like, it's definitely tremendously gone down, I still think the fact that it got as much traction as it has tells me that the market certainly there's a speculation component, but you wouldn't have, I don't personally think you would have had quite the level of catchment in the market and catchment in the media, certainly in crypto media like Cointelegraph. I've looked, there's like dozens of articles on
It's
this over the
everywhere, of
past week.
course. Yeah.
Now, of course, I don't know, and I don't know if that's just the market trying to find, or, publications trying to find a star or something great happening within this bear market. But I do think that there's a good component of this whole picture of what's happened with decentralized social and everything like that. That's reflective of a narrative that's in fact very strong, which is that why are people not getting as much value as they could be getting out of creating content? Why are the platform and the shareholders and the of Instagram, and by virtue Meta, why are they capturing like the 99.9% share of the value creation, right? In terms of their profits. And I think that it's such a narrative that's been happening for some time now, that I think we're all very ready to see what could be possible when you have a more equitable relationship between the content producer and how much value they're getting out of the situation. And I think that at least there's some component of that in this explosion of popularity of Friend.tech. That's my take.
Yeah, I think, I mean, also, just if you think about, say, I mean, if we switched topics for a second to like the market in general, right? pretty much everything else being talked about for the past month and a half or two has basically just been shitcoin season in some shape or form, right? And to look at something like base chain, which is obviously Coinbase's chain, right? So they're not small fish exactly. To look at what kind of projects have come up right off of the bat, they've basically been hardcore just shitcoins, right? Which is basically goes back to my thesis about only regions are around, so that would make sense. But then the second thing, and basically the biggest thing so far, was this decentralized social thing with an added asterisk over it of speculation layer over social graphs. So to me, obviously, there's a lot of
Mhm.
validation for then decentralized social if even the newer chains are seeing projects building on that arc right off the bat and the kind of response it got. But I think this added nuance of like leading with the speculation layer, I really think that there's something to be explored there. I was actually diving into some like interesting stuff that, you know, how people are like, they'll start building knockoffs and they'll start building different stuff. And I was looking at some things that are launching today or, you know, around this time that are trying to do very similar things and different chains, slightly different stuff. You know, they're trying to do it over Telegram as a layer instead of over Twitter and stuff like this, very minor tweaks. But I
Mhm.
think this overall step or recognition of the fact that, well, tokenization is very, very good for speculation and brings in people very easily. I think that is not really to be knocked as a step. I think it's a step in the right direction. I hate to say it, but what's of course in the macro, what's interesting is it wouldn't really work as layers over social networks as much as layers over content networks, in my opinion, in the sense that it would
Mhm. Mhm.
finally only work when you were speculating upon. So say it's about shares of a person, right? Well, the person has to
Mhm.
own that identity first. And as long as that remains broken, this is really short term games, you know? So that's the obvious thing here is that the graph that you play this game upon needs to be decentralized also de facto. And certain people are building that. And so I think, and also, you know, around decentralized identity has a role to play here. I'm sure it's just, I think, only just beginning to develop now. And of course, I know internally we've been planning some stuff, but that is, I think, an inevitable takeaway from the whole play is unless you're building it over something where people own themselves, you can't really own a piece of them and the whole thing kind of, you know. So that's also, I think, interesting to think about.
Certainly, and I think that I think that the way that they've built it, the level of access is interesting. You get a direct line, presumably, to the person. I think that that's interesting, and that's kind of valuable in the case of an influencer or celebrity. I'm speaking specifically about Friend.tech and what that product actually offered, which was you could message, somebody. And you made the point in a separate conversation, it's like messaging, like we can message people,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and we do have existing cool apps where you can sort of get that relationship a little bit, like Cameo, for example, or it, to some extent OnlyFans, right? And indeed, you saw a lot of Only. And by the way, viewers, OnlyFans, it's not just for more salacious content. It is also for. Do you remember when they tried to rebrand to non-salacious? Like you can just use OnlyFans for anything. Well, in this situation, it would apply. But anyway, so but it has that kind of OnlyFans model too, right? Where you could just you're getting that kind of interaction for a fee. Um, but again, right? Like that OnlyFans model isn't like you don't jump onto an OnlyFans subscription so that you can invest in your OnlyFans model becoming like super famous one day or something. It's like completely different. But I do think your point about um, how we're building like these layers on top of these other types of social platforms or content. Like I think you're absolutely right, about the identity itself being owned by the person, right? Like that has to be in place before you can start talking about shares of a person, or they had to rename it keys because of securities issues,
Yeah.
um,
That shit was
for
funny.
for Friend.tech. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, Okay, so this is another point about Friend.tech, and like, believe me, I'm not trying to diminish or demean them at all, or dump on that, because I think that awesome. Like they've got an amazing amount of traction, and the people behind it, great. Um, but I would say that it does show or evince a little bit of like naivete to call the whatever you own of these people's shares, especially if you've been in crypto for, like, you cannot say that. Like, you
So,
cannot say that.
but
It's like,
here's
even if it's not a security thing, like, if you want to raise alarm bells to securities
yeah, yeah.
enforcers, like,
Here's
do not call anything a share.
I'm gonna argue against this, and let me show you how. So all across the world, wherever I have been given the opportunity to speak, I have basically been ranting about how Web3 marketing needs to use words that are closer to shares than NFTs for sure. So
Hmm, hmm.
so the thing is, of course, from somebody within the industry aware of all of the legalities of things and the Ripple case and so on and so forth, it makes sense that that would be an obvious no. But if you think about it
Hmm.
again, just from a go to market, what is the most palatable word for owning a piece of XYZ? That's where they were going with it. And it's genius, to be honest. And this is one of those
Yeah.
cases where, the legal thing just kind of sidelined it. But frankly, that was exactly the right name to have used. And if we had been using stuff that is closer to shares, then again, like I'm saying, it's a spectrum. But to call something really jargonish versus to call it, I remember Trump had put out NFTs, and I think they were called collecting cards or trading cards or something. I mean, because for all of our opinions on him, he's very good at selling things to the masses. And so it was like, even that guy
Hmm.
gets that we should not be calling them NFTs, you know? So I think it's a bit tragic that it could have possibly gotten them into legal trouble, so they had to rename it. But Keys is like
Hmm.
not as much cachet as Shares. Shares is immediately understandable, so it makes sense that they named it that. But this is one of the conundrums of working within this industry. Is anything
Yeah.
pro mass adoption is usually problematic for some other reason or the other, you know.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. So what do you think on this phenomenon is, would you say, of
I
Friend.tech?
I lost you. Sorry, what?
It's okay. What's the final verdict on this phenomenon on Friend.tech?
It's a beginning. It's just a beginning,
Hmm.
and it's you can already see other people trying to do this, which means other people on other chains will try and do this. The whole shebang will happen, and I think some sliver of true innovation is definitely there, and mad props to these guys for doing that. And I think the next really high level innovation when it comes to I think they changed DSO forever, frankly, in the sense that instead of just focusing on the ideological side or on the we're going to build a whole social graph and yada yada yada, right, that side of things, they suddenly turned on speculation mode for decentralized social, which was not really happening as far. And you're right about BitCloud,
Hmm.
but again, there's been a bit of time. And with Lens, even what we did with ISME, we had been treating it very much from an ideological, you will own your personality sort of thing and go from
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
So I think the key innovation here was adding that source of speculation, which is now not going to be, it's not going to go anywhere. That's for sure. It's going to stay, and it's going to be baked into anything
Yeah.
that becomes big in this space moving forward. That much is clear. I think whether they can pivot into that thing that becomes huge or somebody else does it, that's always to be seen. And like I said, the biggest arc of innovation here will eventually be somebody that does this over a network where people actually own themselves. But again, that's a
Hmm.
much
Hmm.
larger arc, and so it's much more iffy to talk about.
I think that, yeah, all of that lands with me in terms of how I think about it as well. I think it's the start of something. I think very insightful to consider how, on your end, how we've been in the DSO sort of decentralized identity world been sort of marketing and been working during this bear market, which has been more ideologically based. Most of the projects in this space have, if they didn't, launch a token in 2021, they decided like we're just not going to launch and we're going to keep we're going to stay just building and then eventually launch it, even if it makes sense. In fact, many of the projects in this space are also equity based, rather than token based, in terms of their structure. So I think that lands pretty well with me, and I would agree. I think what it does show is that I think that's also very insightful to say that maybe we're going to see more projects in this space start to think about the speculation side as a way to, more nakedly as a way to grow an audience and to some extent we've been doing that a little bit. Like there's been airdrop campaigns in terms of incentivization, like we've done one ourselves. So that's always sort of been there. But I think now that we've seen somebody get a lot of traction in the wild for DeSo, I think it's going to cause a lot of projects that are in the DeSo area to start like really kind of ramping up their operations. So we'll see. We'll see. It's exciting though. And, I actually had a separate conversation with Kev recently, and perhaps where we saw the kind of like arc go from Bitcoin to Ethereum to ERC20 to DeFi to NFT. Maybe this next leg is DeSo, right? I mean, it's definitely, I feel like all the pieces are kind of in place now. So I'll be very curious to see what happens next. And of course, we have our own ideas and designs and strategy at NFT3 for how to catalyze on this and leverage it. So that's it for today. And I thank you for joining us and for the humbly titled "The Most Important Thing" podcast. And yeah, that's all.
Yep, we're gonna do this again soon, part two.
Awesome.